So the Secret Book Society is totally different than any of my other historical fiction. So I've written four historical fiction, and all of them are set in World War II, and they are all books about books because I love my books. But the Secret Book Society is actually in the Victorian era, so it's a little bit earlier, or I guess later in history than my previous books have been. And, I really wanted the Victorian era is something that's always really appealed to me. And I wanted something that would kind of let me have the opportunity to explore that curiosity in history a little bit. So when I read about how women were having their reading materials suppressed in that time period, they really didn't want women reading. They felt it took them away from being wives and mothers, and it gave them opinions that made them so difficult to have to deal with. Heaven forbid they have their own opinions. And so they would, basically keep them from reading. And when I read about that, I thought that's where I first got the first kernel of the idea for the Secret Book Society. What if there was a forbidden book club that sort of came about with these women who were wanting to read these books and explore these ideas and let their hearts and their minds open with these ideas. But then I thought, well, this would need a very fearless leader. And that's where I came up with the idea of Lady Duxbury, who is a widow, a countess who has been widowed three times. And yes, there is definitely some rumors going on about the possibility of her having murdered her husbands. And so she sort of sends out the invitation for these women, and they come to what everybody sort of assumes is this banal womanly tea where they just gossip. But really, it's a lot more subversive. It's a lot more intimate, where they're reading books and they're discussing how these books are changing their lives and they're becoming friends with one another. And it's like the ultimate women supporting women kind of book. So, like I said, we have Lady Duxbury, who is the countess who's been widowed three times, and she's a bit of a recluse. So everybody kind of wonders about her, and the reader gets to learn a little bit about her through a hidden diary that is found, and you kind of get to learn little juicy tidbits of her life. And then we have Rose Wharton, who is an American dollar princess. And you'll hear me say again and again, this idea has always fascinated me. I've always been fascinated by the American dollar princesses. And really, they started to become hugely popular more in the early 1900s. So Rose would have been kind of one of the first American dollar princesses coming into England, which would have made that journey even more lonely. I mean, if you would imagine somebody who basically is completely moving to a different country, nobody around who really understands her. She's not as used to all of the etiquette and the rules. It's a completely different world and culture. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting one to explore. And her best friend is really her little pug named Pluto. He's absolutely adorable, if I do say so myself. And then we have Lavinia Cavendish, and she is a girl who is 20 years old. She's very shy. She actually kind of suffers a bit from social anxiety. And of course, you don't call it that back then, you call it hysteria. And I really sort of based her idea for her character on Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale actually worried that she suffered from hysteria when she was younger. And then she, of course, went on to do these amazing things, and what she did for the Red Cross was huge. And then the other one, the last one, is Eleanor Clark, and she is sort of the quintessential perfect English woman. She has the perfect figure. She is well born. She married one of the richest men in England at that time. And she's a mother of a son, and she is absolutely miserable. She's in a very oppressive marriage. And one of the things that I enjoyed about exploring Eleanor's character is that her fashion actually plays a huge part in her life, not because she just loves pretty things. It's because it's that one part in her life, that tiny little square in her life, that she actually has freedom. It is her husband controls everything to the tiniest little half penny that comes out of her purse. And her sartorial taste is essentially the one freedom that she's allowed. One of the big ones was Sense and Sensibility. It really was such a fascinating time period in literary history, like the Victorian era, and even the Regency era, where you start to have Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, and you're really having these literary authors who are coming in, and they're not just having men writing these kind of, paper cutout ideas of women where they're either the angel or the women of ill repute. These are actual real women who have real thoughts and real feelings. And, with Sense and Sensibility, for example, one of the reasons why that's so important in this story is, we have women who are allowed to have real feelings. they get angry, they get sad, they get emotional, and at no point does anybody raise the word hysteria or asylum or anything like that. But that was a very real struggle that women were facing in that particular time period. Another one that was really integral to the story was Jane Eyre, which is one of my personal favorites. And with Jane Eyre, she has the opportunity to kind of, well, not that she has the opportunity, she takes the choice to kind of make her own path. And I think that that was a really novel concept, sort of in that time period. And I wanted the women to really be inspired by it. But I also explore kind of unique books that were around in that era. Like there's one called The Mask of the Poets, and that was actually published in America. And they were all these different poets of all different accolades. You had people who had tons of accolades, and then you had some people who were brand new authors, and they were all put together without any names given in the entire book. And it was so that the books could be read and based off of just how the book sounded or how the poem sounded, rather than, oh, this is a so and so poem, and I love this particular poet. And I thought that was kind of an interesting concept, and so I wanted to make sure I incorporated that in the book as well. But there's plenty more in there. So when I actually came up with this concept, so generally what I do when I write my books is I do about 10 months worth of research, and then I write the book in like 2 months before it's due. And this book I was so excited to write. I actually sort of did it the opposite because I had written Regency romance before, and Regency era and Victorian era are obviously different time periods, but they also do have a lot of similarities. And so I was so enamored with this concept that I actually wrote this book in just about a month. I didn't do any, well, I did do some research, but I really just sat down and it's like it just poured out of me. I was so excited about it. And a huge part of that excitement came from empowering these women, and not only empowering them, but letting them empower one another. I'm just such a huge fan of women supporting other women. I just think it's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. There are so many times in my life that I've had to face catty women and women who are very unkind to one another, and they say horrible things to one another. And that's not how it should be. It really should be people, us helping one another. And so kind of getting to explore that and creating these triumphs that these women could enjoy together. It really just it made me so happy actually writing this book. Like I said, it's like it just glowed out of my soul. And so I wrote it in a month, and then I of course went through and massaged the entire book, and I did a bunch of edits, and I did a ton of research after the fact, and was able to incorporate a lot more of that sort of historical detail that I'm known for into the story.